we are trying to build programs that not only support existing startups and help them accelerate, but also really make sure that we are exposing young people to this concept of entrepreneurship early on. And in general,
Manisha, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm super curious to find out what are you up to these days. So let's start there. What are you up to these days?
Awesome. Hey, Hussein. Excited to chat. What am I up to these days? So most of my time is spent with the organization I'm currently working with called League of Innovators. So that's supporting young entrepreneurs across Canada get exposure to entrepreneurship, build their ideas, scale their startups, the whole gamut of what the entrepreneurial journey can really include. And then I spend a lot of any spare time that I do have, which isn't a lot beyond that. I still support organizations and nonprofits in the education space, supporting young people, especially, which is, of course, such a big topic right now, is prepping young people with the skill set and mindset that they really need to for their futures and navigating the new future of work.
Awesome. So how did you get into, you had a different journey to League of Innovators. You weren't technically hired by League of Innovators. You worked at a different company, was kind of merged into it. Can you tell me about your journey into this and how did you get into that task of helping entrepreneurs and working with young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to League of Innovators, I was running my own nonprofit startup, which was called GradusOne. The goal of that organization was mainly to build soft skills for young people and really help them navigate what this workforce really entails and make sure they have exposure to different career options, but just in general feel more confident as they're navigating what those career options are for them as well. So a lot around personal and professional development. So I was working on that for 3.5 years. Absolutely loved being able to build something from scratch, really see it grow to a point where we could really witness the impact and the changes that the students were going through. But got to a point where we decided to merge that nonprofit with League of Innovators, really to grow our impact across the country. So I transitioned to doing still work in the youth and education space, but more specific to supporting entrepreneurs.
And how did the idea of GradusOne come up at the first place? And you were working with Sam, Sam Tiara, who's one of my dear friends as well. So how did the idea come about? And what did you have any other engagements before that?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of moving pieces that led to that idea as well, which is the case with any idea. It doesn't just happen on one
Do
day.
tell, please do tell.
Yeah, so Sam, who was my co-founder, him and I knew each other for a few years before we had decided to start that nonprofit. And a lot of it stemmed from just personal experiences first, around not being able to navigate what my career options really were, not feeling like I had enough experience to really start working out of university, and in general feeling that sense from most of the people around me as well, that everyone was lost, confused, overwhelmed.
Is that right out of university? Like when you had that
Exactly.
feeling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think I felt it for most of university, where there was just this like constant feeling of not knowing what was going to be next and not ever feeling prepared for what was going to be next. But also, I mean, now I look back and realize that that's all part of life, is you'll never know what's next and you'll never feel prepared, but you just have to do it. But I think that mindset itself wasn't necessarily taught, that you have to be comfortable with the uncertainties and you have to be comfortable with all the transitions that happen. So I was lucky enough to do a number of internships while I was in university, do a lot of volunteer work to make sure that I was at least trying a bunch of things and exploring so I could get closer to what I wanted to do. But I definitely knew that it was such a big problem for most people around me. So Sam and I knew each other because he was actually my advisor and mentor for an organization that I was volunteering for. And that's how him and I had met. And he was very passionate about helping young people explore what their options were and making sure that they had the support system. So him and I, as I was graduating and I was starting my job search, as everyone does, had a conversation about how we can really support young people across the city that were really struggling with the same thing, is not having the resources, support system, knowledge to develop themselves and develop their careers into something that feels meaningful and feels purpose driven as well, and feels really aligned with who they are and what their values are. So we connected with another person that Sam had introduced me to, Manny Petta, who was also really passionate about this vision as well. And I basically agreed just out of university to support the two of them in building this, having absolutely no idea what it was going to be. It was really just, we had an idea of a problem that existed, that we had all personally experienced. We had heard of like countless stories of people around us experiencing, and we knew we wanted to do something about it. And that's how it really all started. And then we went through a whole process of actually like validating and then creating
What was
different
that
ideas.
like? I'm curious. What was like to kind of start something where you had no idea? I mean, you worked at a few internship, but this would be your first ever thing to build from the ground up. And here you are with Sam and Manny, which I think I'm sure they offered some support, but they're busy with their own thing. So you're kind of building this on your own. What was that like?
Yeah. Um, I mean, it was definitely a prime experience of learn by doing because I had
Trial by
no,
fire.
yeah, exactly. I really had, when I first decided to embark on this journey, I had absolutely no idea where to start. And first of all, I was very grateful to be doing it with two people that had the experience of building organizations, supporting startups, and could guide me in taking the first few steps. So I think I never expected to just figure it out on my own. That was never the goal either. So through their like mentorship and guidance, we spent the first at least 4 months purely talking to people. That was the goal, was how do we get to a point where we ourselves feel confident that this is definitely a problem we need to address, and then we can get closer to the specifics about the problem, which as I talk about this problem that we were addressing, it was very big and very broad. There's so many different facets to this area of just like supporting young people navigate careers. Like there's so many things involved in that I think for the first 4 months, we didn't rush into having to build something to solve it right away. We instead really focused on just talking to people and talking to different types of people that we felt were impacted by this or were involved in this in some capacity. So whether it's talking to high school students, figuring out how they were making decisions on what they wanted to do after high school, whether it's talking to post-secondary students as they figured out what they wanted to do during or after university, or we talked to people that decided not to go to university and how they made that decision. We talked to a lot of teachers. We talked to a lot of career counselors. We did focus groups. We talked to a lot of parents, of course, on how they were supporting their students as well. We talked to career coaches on how they were supporting students. And we did a lot of this like through focus groups, through one-on-one interviews, through phone calls, through emails, like whatnot. So that was such a big learning experience in those early days of how important it is to just talk to people, because that will get you closer to actually building an idea that is really aligned with what people need at the end of the day.
Curious, how close was it, the idea that you started with before talking to people, to the idea that kind of uh, was a result of all these conversations that you're now going to implement? What was it, like a slight difference, some nuances, or like there are some massive differences that you've discovered? It's like, oh my God, if we would have started this, we would have like completely failed or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But so when we started, we had a couple of different ideas, but we luckily didn't just pick one and try to stick with that. I think that would have definitely, like, one thing that I always see, even the work that I do with League of Innovators right now, is we see so many entrepreneurs that will have an idea and really want to stick by it, and they don't want to change it no matter who they've talked to and what people have said to them. So I was really lucky in the early days of not having a go-to solution or idea, but instead we had brainstormed a bunch of things, and then we wanted to have all these conversations to figure out if we could filter through all the ideas that we already had. So the ideas had included things like, okay, we're going to do a series of events or conferences. We're going to build a platform where people can write their career goals. We're going to build a mentorship program where people can be matched with someone that can guide them. So we had a bunch of ideas. And then during the conversations, once we got a better understanding of how that person or group had connected to the problem, we would then ask them, like, would this have helped you? Do you think that being matched to a mentor would have helped you? Or do you think it would help you? So it was more so trying to filter through those ideas then and figure out, if any of those were already being done. And if they were being done, how were they being done? Was it working? Was it not working? Where was it being done? And really understanding, like, I think the biggest goal that we really had was to make sure that we weren't reinventing something that was already out there and was being done well. And that's not the purpose. We want to make sure that we're really filling a gap. So we had brainstormed a lot in the beginning, and then we just went out there and talked to people to filter it out, and then start experimenting with, like, by just picking one thing, experimenting it for a few months, seeing if it works. And if it does, then really using that as a way to eventually bring out new pieces into this, like, big solution, if that makes sense.
Cool, super cool. So was it your idea or the idea of the team to make it a nonprofit? Why nonprofit? Why not like a company that is profitable? Was there a distinction in your mind for that choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we went through a process for this as well. So when we had initially launched the organization, it was actually a for-profit organization. So we had discussed that we wanted to really prioritize having like building something that was sustainable in the long run, and would have some sort of revenue stream that allowed us to really grow. As we worked on it for about the almost the first year, we had faced a lot of barriers, actually, by being a for-profit organization in the industry. We were trying to get in touch with a lot of schools, a lot of educators, and we felt this, like, perception of being a for-profit organization that was trying to support youth was limiting us in a way. So we talked to a lot of other organizations that were also in the education space. And I looked at some other nonprofits and how they were doing things differently. I think there are a lot of times where we look at traditional nonprofits and they might be very reliant on grant funding or like corporate partnerships, and that might be their only funding stream, which I think a lot of nonprofits are trying to change that and how nonprofits really operate. So at that point, we decided to transition to being a nonprofit. And that was so that we could make better relationships in the education industry. and also have access to certain funding streams. So as a for-profit organization, we weren't able to apply for a lot of grants. So that was really difficult. So we decided to do that so that we could also apply to a lot of grant organizations. But we also knew that even if we were a nonprofit, we could still have a revenue stream as long as the funds were going back to the nonprofit organization and supporting our growth overall. So we decided to transition, and I look back on it and I think that it was the right decision for us to make. I don't think it's a right or wrong. It's really like, looking at your priorities and personal preferences, and the kind of relationships you want to build. But I think that, of course, like there's so much you can learn, like nonprofits can learn so much from for-profits can learn so much from nonprofits. So that was also my goal, especially because I went to business school. I had been really exposed to the for-profit world prior to, so I wanted to make sure that I could really take the learnings from both worlds too.
Interesting. Now, as someone who just got out of university and it's curious to say, well, why didn't you, for example, or did you have the idea in your mind that like I can find work and I don't have to worry about starting this, I'm very curious about what was going on in your head as you were thinking about the opportunity. What were some of the challenges you saw, like some of the fears you had to deal with as someone who's just got out of university, and now you're tasked with this thing, even though you're working with two awesome people, you're tasked with this thing that doesn't have a certain future per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really difficult at that time, and I still look at that as a very pivotal moment in my life. On that decision I made really, completely changed this like trajectory of my career that maybe I was initially envisioning. Before I decided to basically help start this nonprofit, I was working in HR in a recruitment role. And when I was applying for jobs as well, I was actually applying for a lot of HR based positions. But the startup and the social innovation ecosystem specifically had always interested me, just based on the internships and volunteer work that I'd done. And I knew that I wanted my work to be really impact driven. And I was really being pulled in two different directions, where I was scared to be stuck in a full-time role that I didn't enjoy. And then on the other side, I was scared to take a risk and do something that just financially wasn't going to support me. I live alone, I pay my rent, and how am I supposed to do that coming out of university? So I knew that in terms of making that decision, there were a couple of things that were really important to me. So I had to kind of pick my top three things that I had to meet for me to actually make that decision. And number one was the impact. I wanted to make sure that it was really aligned with what I cared for, a cause that I felt really passionate about, so that I just feel really motivated every day. And, to be fully honest, I saw people around me taking jobs out of university that they were just excited to get a job, but there wasn't a lot beyond that. And I wasn't really excited to hear them talk about this new job that they had accepted. So that was a big priority for me. The second was, I definitely want to make sure I can at least pay my bills. I think the one thing that someone had told me, and the advice they had given me, is right out of university, at least for the first 2 years, do not look at what your paycheck is. As long as you can cover your bills, don't think of how much you're getting paid. So that's really stuck by me. And I had made it really clear that I just want to pay my bills and my rent. And if I can do that, then I don't care about anything else right now. And it was really about the opportunity that allowed me to learn and immerse myself in something that I care about. And then the third was who I was working with. If I can be working with people that I feel inspired by, people that are willing to take out the time to really guide me, and just people that believe in what I can do as well. And I really saw that with Sam and Manny too, when starting out GradusOne. And I think being able to do that alongside the two of them was really, really a big push for me to actually make this decision as well. So I was lucky enough to meet all those three things because Manny, with his as an angel investor, had agreed to support GradusOne, and that was so that I could financially at least cover my like personal bills while I was building something, and really creating this organization until we get to a point where we can build something that feels more sustainable based on the funding that the organization is getting as well. So yeah, I was happy to meet those three criteria, I guess, now that I look at it, out of university. So I made the decision by talking to a lot of my network, my community, my friends, and everyone said, like, it sounds like this is something you care about, you're excited for, you'll be supported with. So take the risk. So I did it. I'm usually not a very I don't take a lot of risks, and I feel like that in itself really encouraged me to take risks in other areas of my life as well, moving forward too.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. It's a very interesting kind of process of looking at your values and what you care about, and then using that as a decision making device. So you went through is it an acquisition or is it a collaboration? Because GradusOne kind of now moved into and merged with League of Innovators, which was the next big thing before. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what did you learn personally, and what are some of the challenges of moving? Because you had there kind of, you can chart your own path in that company, right? Even though you're working with Sam and you're working with Manny, you can define what the goal is, but now you're merging with an organization that have a different goal. What was going on there? What is the process like? What did you learn?
Yeah, it was basically an acquisition because we had decided to dissolve the GradusOne brand after the merger happened. So I went from being like the co-founder of GradusOne to now being on the leadership team for League of Innovators, and it was. I was personally very excited to see that collaboration happen because for me, in general, partnerships and collaboration was a really big priority, especially being in the nonprofit industry. We constantly see people wanting to start nonprofits, but not spending enough time seeing what's already out there. Who can you already support that's doing this work? So I even though GradusOne was my baby, I knew that in order to create a bigger impact, I had to be okay with letting that brand go, because at the end of the day, it's just a brand name and I can still do that work somewhere else. So that in itself was like a big mindset change as well for me personally. But once I joined the League of Innovators team, I knew that I would also now have a team all of a sudden to work with and to brainstorm ideas with. Which, I mean, after being solo for GradusOne, because I was the only full-time person for the organization, I knew that it was going to come with pros and cons because I wasn't used to working with people every day, or I was working with people in a very different capacity versus having a full team to work alongside. So I think the one thing that was incredible was the ability to now think a lot bigger, because when I was doing GradusOne, I was very focused on Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, what can we really do locally to support young people, which, I mean, there's no shortage of like opportunities. There's so much that we could do. But I really liked the transition to now thinking nationally and thinking what we can do across the country to support young people, and what challenges are people facing in maybe a rural region in Alberta versus in BC versus other provinces. So I really appreciated that learning opportunity and the ability to just think big all of a sudden based on the team and the resources. But of course, yeah, there were a lot of challenges as you transition to working with the team after being solo for a long time. You realize that everyone has a really different vision. The League of Innovators team, which prior to that was the next big thing, as you mentioned, and they had a set way of working and a set way of thinking. So really learning about everyone's preferences and what they envision. So I think there are a lot of times where I had to understand my balance of feeling comfortable, really being able to contribute what my experience has been, what I've learned, and wanting to really bring that into the team and make sure that LOI was really learning from it, but at the same time, really respecting where everyone else stood from and really being keen to learn from their own experience as well. So I was like really trying to find that balance always trying to find that balance, but at least for the first few months when that transition happened, it was a lot of learning.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what is your role right now, and what is the goal of League of Innovators when it comes to young entrepreneurs, and how do you define, are you just working with entrepreneurs, or has the mission expanded? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my role, it involves a lot. So I'm the director of community impact and strategy with League of Innovators. So we are trying to build programs that not only support existing startups and help them accelerate, but also really make sure that we are exposing young people to this concept of entrepreneurship early on, and in general, just a skill set and mindset as well. So we have an incredible team that runs 3 acceleration based programs. So that supports people that have an idea and need support incubating their idea, people that already have an existing startup and need support growing it, and then people that are already growing and scaling their startup and need support in challenges like leadership and maybe also raising certain funds as well. My specific role, which I like, is something that I connect with personally as well, is looking at everything that comes before that too. So before someone even has an idea, before someone even is running a startup, how do we actually get them to a point of seeing entrepreneurship as a viable career path, feeling like they don't have to be as like someone. I think entrepreneurship has like traditionally looked really different, and we want to make sure that people understand that anyone can be an entrepreneur, anyone can be entrepreneurial in their career in some ways. So how do we make sure that it feels a lot more accessible to people? So really working towards like democratizing entrepreneurship across the country. So I personally work with high schools, and I work with high school teachers to incorporate entrepreneurial thinking into their classrooms. And we recently built a whole platform called the Innovators Academy that gives high school teachers resources to actually teach entrepreneurship as well. We're also building different courses and camps for young people that are interested in entrepreneurship. So just last year in 2020, we hosted 2 virtual camps for high school students. And for each one, we had over 400 students sign up and engage with us on Zoom to learn about entrepreneurship. So those are the opportunities that I really focus on, so that they get to a point of saying, okay, this is actually something I feel better about taking on because I've heard all these stories. I feel a bit more equipped, and now I'm ready to apply with my idea for a program that League of Innovators actually has. So it's really looking at those early days, which also ties back to my work with GradusOne, because it's at the end of the day, for me, it's always been, how do we make sure people have that mindset, skill set, confidence to really embark on something that they want to do and they've chosen to do, instead of feeling very influenced by what might be happening externally around them as well. So that's been a big focus for me. And then in general, I support League of Innovators with our like overall operations strategy, our culture as a team, how we measure all our impact. So of course, we're still like a small nonprofit startup, so you wear a lot of hats.
How small? How many are on the team?
Yeah, so we are currently 9 people, including 2 interns that we have as well. So it's a fairly small team, and we're also all spread out across Canada. So we're a fully remote team, of
Oh,
course,
wow.
also because
With
COVID.
COVID, yes. So, in regards to working with young entrepreneurs and high school students around around Canada, and you have, I think, League of Innovators. You also expanded around the world, right? Is it now expanding around the world, or is it just in Canada?
Just in Canada, we do get people, like if they're Canadian youth that are based internationally, then they are
Yeah.
part of our program, but just Canada focused right
Yeah.
now.
I don't know where I heard, maybe somewhere like somebody League of Innovators chapter in Spain or something like that. I don't know. Somebody was talking about that on LinkedIn, or maybe in the comments on some of the things that you've done. And for me, it stuck in my mind. I said, "Oh, they're now international," because I follow the news, your news guys at least. So when it comes to working with youth, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see when it comes to them kind of coming up with ideas, venturing into this entrepreneurial thinking, and why is it so important to kind of engage in that thinking?
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. I think the one thing that we tend to see is that, either you will be at a point where you have too many ideas and you don't know how to filter through them,
Hmm.
or you'll be at a point where you're feeling stuck and you don't know how to come up with ideas. And I think those two are very different situations to be in, and like have to be managed in a really different way. So and we definitely get both. People that are filled with ideas will come to us, be really excited, but at the same time feel stuck in a very different way because they just don't know how to get started, or they don't know how to actually pick an idea to start testing out, which is really the like one thing we always recommend is that in order to filter through all of it, number one, you need to start talking to people. And I think the more you talk to people, the closer you'll get to understanding whether that idea is valid or not, and if that's something that you want to actually test out and spend your time experimenting with, which is like a process on its own. So I think that the challenge sometimes is just like committing to something to test, which, of course, entrepreneurship or not, I think that's anything in life is, in order to know if it's going to work, you need to do it. You need to actually take action of some sort.
100%.
But I think on the other side as well, we get a lot of people that feel stuck because they know that they have a problem that they really want to solve, but they don't have ideas around it yet. And it's funny because the same advice comes with that too, is okay, well, start talking to people. Start talking to people that are experiencing the problem, that are working with that problem in some way connected to that problem, so you can better understand what's already out there, what the gaps really are, and stop putting the pressure on yourself to have ideas and have it all figured out as well. So I think that it's like the biggest challenge is that feeling of being stuck in some way and not knowing what those like first steps are for you to start talking to people, and for you to feel like, okay, I'm taking action in one way and making progress in one way, some capacity.
Yeah, and you said that you have some online components of the programs that you offer for the entrepreneurs. Did you find that where is the breakdown? For example, there are a ton of resources online. We live in a world where now you can find out about anything you want to do. It's staggering. Like I compared to when I was growing up, and we were just starting the internet, kind of access to the internet, and I spent 6 hours to download one website. Like it's now you just you ask Google, how do I do that, and you have tons of answers. Are they overwhelmed with the amount of information? What kind of, because it's not just adding information to them, right? There's something more in the programs. What do you see as the key components that will enable people to take action, aside from telling them to do something? What are the key components that you guys discovered from working with those young entrepreneurs that will enable them to move to action and start talking to people and start executing on their ideas?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I think if you go Google entrepreneurship, how do I become an entrepreneur? It's really overwhelming. You'll get a number of videos and articles and courses and programs. And I think for any young person, for anyone really, like it doesn't matter if you're young or not, it'd be really hard to navigate, and it's very overwhelming. Uh, for us, even pre-COVID, we had really focused on building virtual programs so that these programs would be accessible to any young person across the country.
Mm.
But for us, the big piece was community all the way. And I think a lot of times when entrepreneurs applied to our programs, they were part of it. One of the first things they would say was, I didn't realize that there were other people doing this, or I'm so glad I'm not doing this alone. Because a lot of times they are still maybe going to university, just leaving high school, they're in their like early 20s, feeling like they're working on their business or exploring entrepreneurship in a silo, and they're doing it on their own. So that community and accountability piece was really big. So for all our programs, we make sure that we have live sessions, we have huddles with them where they're matched with in different groups. And in smaller settings, so that they can really get to know each other and make sure that they have this community of people that might be working on different things, but they can brainstorm their challenges together. They can bounce ideas off of each other, or they can simply say, like, I'm having a bad day and it's really hard to wake up today because I'm burnt out. And they can share that kind of challenge and advice with each other as well, but just know that they are not alone in this. And also they have this accountability system as well. They'll come together every week because someone will check in with them to see what progress they actually made. Did they actually contact the person that they said they were going to? And if not, what was blocking them, and how can we make sure they can get past that blocker as well? So I think that has been the biggest value add, is that it's a lot. I mean, it's personal preference, but I know for myself personally, I have a tough time on doing things on my own, especially if I'm doing something new, and especially if it's like, you know, the entrepreneurial path in general is a lonely one if you're not really building this support system around you, whether it's like your friends and family supporting you, or people that are also on their own journey of being an entrepreneur, so they can understand you in a really different capacity too. So that's been a big priority for us, and has been expressed over time, like countless times from our entrepreneurs, that it's the biggest value add for them too.
That's very interesting. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and ask you about something you said, which is the challenge of being alone. As I come from a Middle Eastern family, I stayed at my parents' home until I was 28. So I've always had people around me. Now you can debate the benefits and kind of challenges of that, of living at your parents' home is just a norm there where I come from. But now students and young adults are out of their home at around 18 or so. They're building their own life, and add to it the pressure of being an entrepreneur, which is, as you said, a lonely journey. And your focus, it's important that you're saying that you're focused on, hey, to have someone to say, I'm having a bad day. Can you speak a little bit more on the importance of that, and the okayness of, you can have a bad day and you need to rely on other people through your journey and through what you experienced working with hundreds of entrepreneurs?
Yeah. I think we're finally experiencing a shift in how we talk about this in the world of entrepreneurship, especially. I feel like when I first had started with League of Innovators, there was still a very apparent culture around hustling and making sure that if you are deciding to be an entrepreneur and starting your own venture, you are working yourself to the bone. And that was the norm. And right, like I heard so many stories of people saying that they, would stay at home for 15 hours working, eating ramen, and like the normal story of being
And they
an
celebrate it
entrepreneur.
even.
And
They
they
don't.
celebrated it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that we're so, like, we can finally see that shift happen on why it's so important to talk about your mental health as an entrepreneur, because that should not be the norm. That is not sustainable. In our programs as well, we'll be working with our entrepreneurs, we'll have our like usual content on growing your business, but then we'll realize that some of them are burnt out, and they're at a point where they aren't able to even apply it to their business. So I think we started really realizing that there were so many more issues that folks were going through, and that it no longer was just about your business and you as an entrepreneur, but we have to be able to look at it in a more holistic way, because it's your whole life. And what you do as an entrepreneur is going to impact every aspect of your life, of course. How you're doing as an entrepreneur and how you're doing financially is going to impact every relationship, how you show up, how you feel, how exhausted and emotionally exhausted you feel as well. So I think we saw so many people, and still do see so many people on a weekly basis, that are really struggling to get through this like feeling and pressure of having to do it all and having to figure it all out. That a lot of times mindset of being an entrepreneur is so crucial in the early days, and talking about, if you're going to do this, how are you going to do it in a way that you prioritize your own well-being, so that you can actually continue to do this work. And it's not just a 2-year stint and you've gone to a point where you're capped out, and you then go to working full time again because you feel like the journey of being an entrepreneur is just too much for you, because you just didn't do it in a balanced way. So I think that's one thing we're especially because we work with young entrepreneurs, we feel like, hey, it's an opportunity for you to learn this early on so you don't experience this later. So I think open conversations about how you feel is something that we try to facilitate, so that it eventually feels a bit more safe for them to be honest and not feel like they have to put this facade of showing up in a way that they just like really don't feel that way inside for them. And we try to get them to realize that that's normal for every single person, and if they're willing to open up, then they're creating a safe space for others to express themselves too.
That's so important. Thanks for sharing that. The other thing that occurs to me is that from the outside view, somebody can look at your journey and say, out of university, immediately worked, started something with 2 great people, got an acquisition by the League of Innovators, which is connected somehow to Hootsuite. And like, you have all these. So from the outside, it looks like, oh my God, she's so successful and she didn't experience failure. And they don't know obviously the journey, but of course there's ups and downs along the way. There are a lot of hardships that you had to go through. um, can you speak a little bit about some of these hardships, and what was it like to have that hardship, and what got you out of it and to continue on your path towards success?
Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting to hear someone else say, "Oh, you it seems like you've been so successful," when you don't feel that way, which is um of course like a bit of imposter syndrome, a bit of just like setting expectations for yourself. I think sometimes like it's a cultural thing too, where like I know I'm not there. So I think that there is, I mean, even when it comes to my mindset around it has been a really big hardship. I think initially when I was deciding to embark on starting a nonprofit versus going and working a more stable job, that was a really big decision. And I think that there was a lot of pushback in some ways as well. And I think even though it's been a number of years, I still struggle with it a lot. I still struggle with this decision I've made, because I never saw myself as someone that was naturally very entrepreneurial and would work with startups. And I think even being in the nonprofit space specifically is sometimes I like definitely ask myself like, is this definitely where I want to be? And I luckily I think it's because I'm working on a cause that I really believe in, and the impact is there, and it feels like really meaningful work that drives me every day. But I think the challenges definitely come when you start comparing yourself and you start looking at other people that might be in bigger organizations, might be making more money, are also like the same age as you and are making progress in a different way. So I think that it's a daily struggle,
Yeah.
to be honest. But I think for me, it's really important to constantly remind myself why I'm doing this work. And if there is generally something that I feel is a blocker for me mentally, then I also have to address it in some way. So I'm very, very aware that being in a nonprofit startup is not very financially stable. And I'm also at a point in my life where I know that I have to make sure I have certain things covered for myself personally too. So that's where I have to, make sure I find a fine balance. It has to still be work that is very impact driven, that I really care about, but it has to be work that does make me feel more financially secure. So I think you get to a point where certain things start being added on to your criteria because that's just like the point you are in your life. But I think people add it to their list in different stages of their life. So I think that is constantly a challenge, an internal challenge I face every day.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. It's so easy to hear other people looking at your journey and analyze it in their own way. And sometimes they see what they want to see. And as you said, they don't see the fears, the challenges, everything we go through. It's very interesting. So, for you, what does the future look like? What is it that you're looking forward to in the next few years that are coming and excited about?
Yeah. There's a lot that I'm excited about. I think I'm really excited to see what the future of education and the future of work in general will really look like. I think in the last year, especially, everyone has been really questioning the traditional education system. So I'm very, very curious to see what those alternative solutions will really be. And I did a traditional degree, but I fully support the idea that there are better solutions out there for people, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm also really excited to see what this future of work in the sense of being remote and virtual really looks like. We've been lucky to be virtual for a couple of years since we started League of Innovators, but I think that of course that shift is happening now across different industries. So I'm excited to see what that looks like, especially from this experience people have with their work, with their teams, and how do we make sure that people still feel really engaged with their work despite being remote and virtual. So I think that will be a really exciting thing and I think people are going to come up with some really creative solutions around it too. So I'm excited to see what that entails.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Manisha, it's been awesome talking to you. Thanks for your sharing authentically and really interesting points of your journey, entrepreneurship, and some very good value stuff. Definitely reminded me of some of the stuff I need to about, like talking to people. So
Yeah.
thank you for being here. Had a blast and great to have you on.
Thanks, Hussein. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me.